Okay, so picture this: a woman named Hannah, facing heartbreak and a dream that feels impossible. She's dealing with deep struggles, social pressure, and a longing that just won't go away. But here's the thing: through all of it, she turns to prayer, she perseveres, and she holds on to hope, even when life seems cruel. Today, we're diving into her story, the highs, the lows, and the quiet moments where faith meets real life. You're gonna want to hear this one. Alright, so let's dive into Hannah's world a little more and really get a feel for what she was dealing with. Hannah's story starts with this deep, personal pain. She couldn't have children. I mean, think about that for a second. In her culture, having children wasn't just a personal desire, it was a huge deal socially and spiritually. To not be able to conceive could bring shame, sadness, and even social pressure from family and the wider community. And for Hannah, this struggle was a heavy burden on her heart. Her husband, Elkanah, is introduced to us early on, and his name in Hebrew actually means God has acquired, which is kind of interesting when you think about it in the context of his relationship with Hannah. He genuinely loves her, he's devoted, and clearly cares for her deeply. The Bible points out that even though Hannah was unable to have children, Elkanah didn't divorce her, which, given the social norms at the time, was a real testament to his love. Divorce over infertility was, unfortunately, pretty common back then. Men often took additional wives just to continue their lineage, which, to be fair, was considered essential in their culture. Passing on heritage, inheritance, and family name was a massive deal, so there was a lot of external pressure influencing their choices. And that's exactly what happens in Hannah's case. Elkanah does take a second wife, Peninnah. Her name actually means pearl, which you'd think sounds lovely, right? But here's the twist: she's kind of the opposite of a gem in this story. She has children, which sets her apart from Hannah in the ways that matter culturally. And, well, Peninnah doesn't exactly behave kindly toward Hannah. She provokes her, she mocks her, and really makes Hannah's pain more visible. Verse 6 even says she provoked Hannah severely to make her miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. Can you imagine you're already carrying this deep heartache, and someone constantly rubs it in your face, like it's your fault? So Hannah's going through this cycle year after year, visiting the house of the Lord, trying to worship, to connect, to pray, and Peninnah is right there, reminding her of what she doesn't have. It's this incredibly raw human moment: bitterness, sorrow, envy, frustration, all rolled into one. Hannah weeps. She doesn't eat sometimes because of the pain, which tells you how deep it runs. And you know, this isn't some mild irritation, it's a daily repeated reminder that she is in a position society considers incomplete, at least in the context of motherhood and legacy. And the fact that she loves her husband and wants a child with him just intensifies all of it. Elkanah, on the other hand, he sees her distress, and I mean, he really does try to respond in his own way. He's kind of like, "Hannah, why are you crying? Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" Which on the surface sounds sweet. I mean, he's saying, "Hey, I love you. Isn't that enough?" But the reality is, he can't really fix her problem. And it's one of those moments where human love and desire to help meet the limits of what we can actually do. He's trying to be supportive. But Hannah's pain is far deeper than just needing reassurance. She doesn't answer him. She just rises after eating and drinking. There's that subtle tension where he's trying, but he doesn't fully understand. And that's incredibly relatable, right? Sometimes we try to help people we love, and we end up feeling helpless because our presence and comfort, as heartfelt as they are, can't solve everything. And while Elkanah's heart is clearly toward Hannah, he even gives her a double portion during the feast times to show favor and love. The reality is that the cultural and social pressures aren't going away. Hannah's pain exists alongside these gestures of love, but it's also intensified by the cultural norm of polygamy and lineage. God's original design, as referenced in Genesis 2:24, was for a man and woman to become one flesh, not 3 or 4 or 10. So when we see Elkanah with Peninnah, it's a snapshot of human culture at the time. He's caught in the fleshly patterns of society, doing what people did, but not necessarily what God intended. And for Hannah, this cultural context makes her struggle even more layered. She's navigating her personal grief while living in a system that emphasizes fertility and heritage above everything else. Meanwhile, Peninnah isn't just a passive rival, she's active in her provocation. Year after year, she reminds Hannah of her inability to conceive. And every trip to the tabernacle for worship isn't just a spiritual act, it becomes a painful reminder of what she doesn't have. You can imagine the emotional weight here, how crushing it must have felt. Hannah is surrounded by people, loved ones, even in religious practice, but there's this constant needle, this social pressure that keeps her in the emotional space of grief and longing. So Hannah's struggle isn't just about infertility, it's about the complex interplay of relationships, culture, and deep personal desire. She's living in a world that has very specific ideas of family, of value, of a woman's role, and she's feeling the impact of not fitting into that mold. She's loved by her husband, yes, but even his love has limits in terms of solving this problem. She's insulted and provoked by Peninnah. She's navigating social norms that are not kind to her condition. And all of this happens while she's trying to maintain her faith and her own sense of identity. What I love about this part of the story, though, is that it sets the stage for understanding the depth of Hannah's character. We see her as a real, relatable person. She isn't perfect, and she isn't magically detached from the world. She's human, she's hurting, and she's navigating one of the toughest social and emotional landscapes possible. And yet, in the middle of all of this, there's a glimmer of hope, her faith, her quiet determination to seek God, even when everything around her is painful and discouraging. That tension between deep personal pain and steadfast faith is what makes Hannah's story so compelling. It's not just about the struggle, it's about the way she handles it, the way she keeps moving forward, and the way she pours her heart out to God even when the world seems against her. So yeah, that's Hannah's struggle in a nutshell. Infertility, emotional pain, social pressure, a complex family dynamic, and a rival who constantly reminds her of what she lacks. And through it all, we start to see hints of this incredible strength, resilience, and faith that will carry her through some of the most intense moments of her life. It's messy, it's human, and it's deeply relatable because even though this happened thousands of years ago, the emotions, the longing, the social challenges, they're not so different from what people experience today. Okay, now let's step into one of the most intense and deeply personal moments in Hannah's story, her prayer at the tabernacle. So picture this, she's standing there, heartbroken, carrying years of grief and disappointment. Her soul is heavy, filled with bitterness and longing, and she's desperate for a child. This isn't just a casual moment of reflection. This is raw, soul-pouring anguish. She's weeping, she's crying out, and every word, every silent motion of her lips is a plea directly to God. Hannah approaches God in a way that is incredibly intimate and personal. She isn't just saying a few words, she's pouring herself out completely. The text even says she was in bitterness of soul. Think about that phrase, bitterness of soul. It's not just sadness or frustration, it's a deep, gnawing ache that touches every part of her being. And here's the thing, God can handle that. He can handle the full spectrum of our emotions. Hannah is honest. She doesn't try to polish her feelings or hide her sorrow. She comes exactly as she is, fully vulnerable. And then she makes this vow. She says to the Lord, basically, if you give me a son, I will dedicate him completely to you. She commits him to be a Nazirite, meaning no razor will touch his head. This vow is profound because she's not only asking for a blessing, she's promising to give back, to surrender something deeply personal before she even receives it. Imagine the faith required to make a promise like that. She's saying, God, if you answer this prayer, this child will belong to you, not just in a spiritual sense, but in service, completely devoted to you for life. And she makes this vow fully aware of the emotional difficulty, the potential pain of giving her child to God from the very beginning. Now, here's where the story gets even more human. Eli the priest is sitting nearby, and he sees Hannah moving her lips, praying silently without any audible words. And here's the twist, Eli assumes she's drunk. He says, "How long are you going to be drunk? Put your wine away." Can you imagine that moment? Hannah, in the deepest intensity of her prayer, pouring out her soul, and the priest thinks she's been drinking. It's almost comical if it weren't so heartbreaking, but it really highlights how her desperation and intensity are completely misread by someone who should be offering guidance and support. And it's a moment we can all relate to, right? Sometimes when we're in the throes of emotion, especially praying or processing grief, people misinterpret our intensity or our silence. Hannah responds with this simple, powerful explanation. No, my lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I haven't been drinking anything. I've just poured out my soul before the Lord. That's it. That's her honesty and her courage. She doesn't get defensive or angry. She simply tells the truth about her heart. And she continues to pour out her grief and her complaint, letting God see every piece of it. Like she's expressing all the sorrow, frustration, and longing she's been carrying, acknowledging her pain instead of hiding it. And it's important to notice that this is a form of prayer. Prayer isn't always composed or eloquent. Sometimes prayer is raw, trembling, desperate words, sometimes only in the heart, sometimes whispered with lips that move, but no sound escapes. That's still prayer. That's still communication with God. What's amazing about this scene is the combination of vulnerability, faith, and courage. Hannah doesn't let the misunderstanding with Eli stop her. She doesn't let the misjudgment of a human interrupt her connection with God. Instead, she continues, fully trusting that God sees her heart, that God knows her intentions, and that God can handle the full weight of her emotion. It's a beautiful example of faith in action, not a passive, easy faith, but one that engages the messy, painful human reality of life. As she prays, Hannah's words reflect a profound understanding of God's role in her life. She acknowledges her need, she expresses her suffering, but she also places her trust fully in God's hands. This is where her vow becomes more than a promise. It becomes an act of faith. She is saying, God, if you hear me and bless me, I will give back what I have longed for so deeply. It's a moment that perfectly illustrates the intertwining of desire, devotion, and trust. And this isn't just an emotional response, it's a spiritual strategy. Hannah recognizes that the deepest solution to her sorrow isn't human intervention, it's God himself. No counselor, no family member, not even her husband can solve the ache in her heart the way God can. And then there's this tension in the moment because, remember, she is misunderstood by Eli. Here's a woman on her knees, heart in pieces, and the spiritual authority figure in her life misreads her completely. But notice how she navigates it without anger, without shame, without defensiveness. She clarifies her position gently, explaining that she has simply been pouring out her soul in prayer. And Eli's response is fascinating. Once he understands, he blesses her. He says, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you the petition you have asked of him." That's it. Simple, affirming, and it validates her faith and her approach to God. And you can imagine the relief she must have felt, not just in the understanding, but in being affirmed to continue in her faith. Now, what I find really moving is the transformation in Hannah herself. She came in bitterness of soul, in deep anguish, and after this prayer, after this pouring out, she leaves with a changed demeanor. Verse 18 says her face is no longer sad. That's huge. It doesn't mean her problem is solved yet. It doesn't mean she has a child in her arms, but her soul has found peace in the act of prayer, in trusting God, in surrendering her request and her promise fully to Him. And this is such a vital part of the story. A prayer isn't just about asking for things, it's about realigning your heart, finding peace in the midst of waiting, trusting the one who sees and knows everything. So let's pause and just take a moment to appreciate the depth here. Hannah's prayer is not only heartfelt, but also deliberate. She understands the covenantal spiritual importance of what she's committing to. She's dedicating a life, promising a child to God before he's even conceived. And she does it with complete honesty and vulnerability, even under the misjudgment of others. She is raw, desperate, but also fearless in her faith. And that, I think, is what makes this story so enduring and so powerful for us today. It shows the intersection of human emotion, faith, and divine purpose. In the middle of all the social pressures, the family tensions, the misunderstanding, and the deep personal grief, Hannah demonstrates a model of prayer that is profoundly instructive. She prays fully, she prays honestly, she prays with a mixture of hope and surrender, and she doesn't allow misunderstanding or judgment to derail her spiritual connection. Every element of this scene, the bitterness of her soul, the intensity of her prayer, the vow to dedicate Samuel, and the interaction with Eli paints a picture of a woman whose faith is real, raw, and deeply human. And here's the takeaway. Hannah's example teaches us that prayer isn't just about asking. It's about coming fully as we are, bringing our deepest hurts, our bitterness, our longing, and trusting God with it all. It's about being courageous enough to make vows of faith, even when the outcome is uncertain. It's about trusting God's understanding over human misjudgment, knowing that even when others misinterpret us, God sees the heart. And it's about leaving the prayer with a soul that is lighter, even if the answer hasn't come yet. Hannah's prayer at the tabernacle is an invitation for all of us to bring our whole selves to God, no matter the circumstances, and to trust that our deepest longings can be heard. Alright, so after all that heartache, all that desperate prayer, something amazing happens. God remembers Hannah. It's not instant, but the promise begins to unfold in a way that is both gentle and profound. She and Elkanah return home, carrying the weight of years of longing, and yet there's this quiet shift in her life. In the process of time, God answers her prayer. She conceives, and this moment, oh man, it's like a river of relief flowing through her soul. All the years of sorrow, all the tears, all the social pressure, it starts to transform into hope and joy. When Hannah finally gives birth, she names her son Samuel, which literally means God hears. And isn't that just perfect? Every time she says his name, it's a reminder, not just for her, but for everyone around her, that God was listening. That's powerful because it turns a deeply personal story into a living testimony. She went through unimaginable pain, she cried out with all the depth of her soul, and now here is this tangible evidence that God did indeed hear her. You can almost feel the weight lifting off her chest, the release of all the sorrow she had carried for so long. And think about the emotional journey for a second. Hannah had been longing for a child for years, facing provocation from Peninnah, navigating the cultural norms that made her feel inadequate, and yet she stayed faithful. This isn't just a story about conceiving a child, it's about faithfulness, perseverance, and the gradual fulfillment of a promise that required both patience and trust. Every step from her sorrowful prayers to this very moment of holding Samuel is a testament to that trust in God's timing. Elkanah, too, must have felt a mix of joy and awe. He loved Hannah deeply, and this child wasn't just another addition to the family. This was the culmination of years of yearning, a living symbol of Hannah's prayers and devotion. And for Hannah, the experience is transformative. It's not just about receiving a child, it's about seeing God's faithfulness manifested in her life. In a way so tangible, she can hold it in her arms. And the fact that she names him Samuel, like God hears, is her way of immortalizing that moment of divine response, of making sure that every mention of her son carries with it the story of her prayers answered. And the story doesn't just end there with the birth. Hannah's joy is intertwined with her faithfulness. She doesn't just rejoice privately, she continues to honor her vow to God, committing Samuel to his service. You can feel the joy mixed with reverence in her actions. This is a woman who prayed from the depth of her soul, made a covenant with God, and now, seeing the miracle unfold, remains steadfast in her commitment. There's a profound spiritual maturity here. She doesn't let the joy of the moment overshadow the seriousness of her vow. What's beautiful about this narrative is how it shows the interplay between divine timing and human emotion. God answers, but in the process of time, teaching Hannah and us really about patience and trust. It's not instantaneous. It's not a snap your fingers moment. It's a process. That's important because often we want immediate answers to our prayers, and when they don't come, it can feel like God isn't listening. Hannah's story reminds us that God hears, He remembers, and He acts, often in ways that require us to wait, to trust, and to remain faithful even when the outcome isn't immediately visible. And when Samuel is born, you can imagine the scene Hannah holding him, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. She has endured provocation, social pressures, and her own deep sorrow. And now, there's this tangible proof that God has been present the whole time, listening and faithful. It's a profoundly human moment, full of emotion and spiritual significance all at once. This is not a story of instant gratification. It's a story of enduring faith meeting God's perfect timing. Naming the child Samuel is more than just a label, it's a declaration. Every time anyone calls him by name, it's a reminder that God heard her prayers. The name itself carries the story, the emotion, and the testimony of faith. It's like Hannah is creating a living, breathing monument to God's faithfulness. A reminder that even in the deepest sorrow, prayers are heard. And that's a theme that resonates so powerfully even today. We all have moments where we feel unheard, overlooked, or desperate. Hannah's story shows us that those prayers do not go unnoticed, and that sometimes the waiting period is part of the preparation for the blessing itself. And beyond the personal joy, there's also this ripple effect. Samuel's birth sets the stage for the next chapter, literally, in the spiritual life of Israel. He's not just any child. He's going to grow up to be a prophet and a judge, a transitional figure between the period of the judges and the kings. But at this moment, he's just a little boy, yet his very existence is already shaping history. All of this started with Hannah's faithful, desperate prayer. The story emphasizes that God's plans are bigger than our immediate perspective, and that sometimes the most ordinary moments holding a newborn, naming a child, are actually extraordinary in the context of God's unfolding plan. And if we pause for a second to consider Hannah's perspective, it's not just joy, it's a mix of awe, relief, gratitude, and reverence. She prayed with the depth of her heart, and now she sees the answer. This fulfillment of God's promise isn't just about relief, it's about seeing God's faithfulness in motion. Her soul has been tested, her faith has been refined, and now she has the joy of seeing God's word come to life. It's deeply human, yet profoundly spiritual, a reminder that our experiences of God are often intertwined with our very real emotions and circumstances. So, in a nutshell, this part of the story is about God remembering Hannah, answering her prayers, and blessing her with Samuel. It's about joy emerging from sorrow, faithfulness rewarded in time, and the profound human experience of seeing a divine promise fulfilled. Naming Samuel, and God hears and captures everything his life becomes a living testimony to God's attentive love and faithfulness. It's a story that's as much about Hannah's trust and perseverance as it is about God's timing and faithfulness. A beautiful blend of human emotion and divine response that resonates across time and culture. Okay, now let's pause and really look at what we can learn from Hannah, not just as a biblical figure, but as a human being navigating heartbreak, social pressure, and deep longing. There are 4 qualities that really stand out in her story prayer: perseverance, praise, and patience. And when you see them in action, you start to realize just how intentional and inspiring her life was. First up is prayer. Hannah is the ultimate example of a praying woman. She didn't just whisper a few words and hope for the best. No, she prayed with her whole soul. She came to God in honesty, bringing all the pain, the bitterness, the longing, and even the anger she felt. Verse after verse in chapter 1 shows her pouring out her heart. She describes herself as having a bitterness of soul, a sorrowful spirit, grief, and anguish. And she doesn't hold any of that back. She pours it out fully before God, trusting that He can handle it. Think about that for a second. How often do we hold back in prayer because we're worried about sounding too emotional, too intense, or maybe even too selfish? Hannah shows us that prayer isn't about perfection. It's about connection. It's about bringing the raw, messy reality of your heart to God and trusting Him to meet it. And here's the thing, her prayer wasn't only about asking for a child. Yes, she had a very real, very personal desire, but her prayer was also about seeking God Himself. She understood that the deepest healing and the truest satisfaction for her aching heart wasn't going to come from Elkanah, from Peninnah, or even from human approval. The one who could truly minister to her soul was God, and that's something that resonates, right? Sometimes we go looking for comfort in the wrong places, trying to patch our own wounds with other people or temporary solutions. Hannah's example reminds us that prayer is where we can bring the depth of our needs and the truth of our hearts. fully confident that God can handle it. Next is perseverance. This one hits hard because Hannah's situation was anything but easy. Imagine being provoked year after year by Peninnah, dealing with a culture that valued fertility above all else, and trying to maintain faith in the midst of social judgment and personal grief. Then, on top of that, when she finally pours her heart out in prayer, the priest, Eli, misjudges her and thinks she's drunk. Most people might give up at that point, feel misunderstood, walk away discouraged, but not Hannah. She perseveres. She keeps trusting God even when everyone else around her misunderstands her, even when her husband doesn't quite get it, even when society itself seems stacked against her. Perseverance isn't just about enduring pain, it's about continuing to trust, to act, and to move forward faithfully, even when nothing seems to be changing. Hannah shows us that steadfastness in faith isn't passive, it's an active choice to keep seeking God and to keep trusting Him even when circumstances are painful or confusing. Then we have praise. And this is one of the most beautiful aspects of Hannah's story. She doesn't wait until she gets the answer to start worshiping. Verse 19 tells us that she rose early in the morning, worshiped before the Lord, and then returned home. This was before she knew she was going to conceive. Praise in the middle of waiting. Praise before the answer comes, now that's faith. It's so easy to worship when life is going exactly how we want it, when prayers are answered, when circumstances are perfect. But Hannah worshiped while she waited. She separated her desire from the nature of God. She recognized that God's character, His faithfulness, His sovereignty, His worth did not depend on her immediate situation. Worship wasn't conditional for her. It was about acknowledging God's goodness, His holiness, and His rightness in all things, even before seeing the results of her prayers. And isn't that powerful? That kind of praise shifts the focus from our problems to God's presence, from our impatience to His sovereignty. It's a model for all of us. A reminder that worship is about God, not just about what He does for us. And finally, patience. This is the hard one for all of us. Right, Hannah had to wait. Even after God heard her prayer, she didn't immediately hand Samuel over to the tabernacle. Yes, she waited until he was weaned. Some scholars say that might have been anywhere from 3 to 5 years, maybe even longer in the broader sense of Hebrew meaning for weaning. That's a long time to hold onto a child you've prayed for years, knowing you've promised to dedicate him to the Lord. But Hannah exemplifies patience, not just passive waiting, but active, faithful waiting. She's fully present with her child, nurturing him, and preparing herself to fulfill her vow at the right time. Patience here is intertwined with trust. She trusts that God's timing is perfect, that He will accomplish His purposes in the course of time, and that waiting isn't a denial of God's blessing, but a part of receiving it in the right way. And these 4 qualities, prayer, perseverance, praise, and patience, don't exist in isolation. They work together. Her deep, honest prayers feed her perseverance. Her perseverance, in turn, allows her to maintain praise even in the waiting, and her praise and trust help her to exercise patience. Knowing that God's timing is perfect, it's a holistic model of faith, a practical blueprint for handling life's difficulties, disappointment, and longing. What makes Hannah so relatable is that she's not perfect. She struggles, she experiences deep emotion, she faces misunderstanding, and she's tempted by grief. But her faithfulness, her intentionality, and her willingness to fully engage with God make her an enduring example. She models a way of living that balances emotional honesty with spiritual trust, raw human vulnerability with steadfast faith. It's messy, it's real, and it's inspiring. So as we reflect on Hannah's story, we can ask ourselves, are we praying with the depth and honesty of Hannah? Are we persevering when circumstances are difficult and others misunderstand us? Can we worship, truly praise God, even when the answer isn't in our hands yet? And are we cultivating patience, trusting God's timing, even when it feels long and uncertain? Hannah's life shows that these qualities aren't just lofty ideals, they're practical, lived realities that shape character, deepen faith, and prepare us for God's work in our lives. And the best part, This isn't just a story from thousands of years ago. These are timeless lessons we can carry into our own lives, into our own moments of waiting, longing, and praying. When we look at Hannah, we see someone who not only prayed deeply, but who continued to trust despite provocation and misunderstanding, who worshiped before answers came, and who exercised patience in God's timing. She's not distant or untouchable. She's incredibly human, and that makes her example even more powerful. Her story invites us to do the same, to bring our whole selves to God, to stay faithful in the waiting, to praise in the uncertainty, and to trust that our prayers are heard. And that, I think, is the heart of what makes Hannah such a timeless model of faith. Okay, so now we get to one of the most intense and emotional moments in Hannah's story, actually bringing Samuel to the tabernacle to fulfill her vow. Imagine this after all the years of longing, praying, and waiting. She's finally holding her son, the very child she prayed for with every fiber of her being. But here's the thing, she's not just holding him to love him, she's about to give him over to the Lord completely. That's no small thing. Can you even imagine the heart of a mother who's prayed for a child for so long, walking into a sacred space, knowing she's going to surrender him? It's gut-wrenching. Really, Hannah waits until Samuel is weaned, which could be anywhere from 3 to 5 years old, maybe older depending on interpretation. The idea of weaning isn't just about nutrition, it's about him being less dependent on her physically and emotionally. So this moment is charged with all the tension of parting from someone she's poured her heart into for years. And yet, she steps forward, driven by faith and devotion, determined to fulfill the promise she made in prayer. This is what makes Hannah remarkable. She's feeling the pain, she's human, but she's also profoundly faithful. When she approaches the tabernacle, she doesn't go empty-handed. She brings offerings 3 bulls, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. These aren't just ritualistic gestures, they're tangible acts of worship, symbols of her devotion, and a way to honor God as she fulfills her vow. Every step she takes is both a spiritual act and a personal sacrifice. And you can sense the intensity of the moment, the mix of reverence, joy, grief, and anticipation all swirling together. And then she meets Eli the priest again. Remember, he had misunderstood her before, thinking she was drunk, but now he witnesses this act of devotion firsthand. She addresses him with respect and honesty, saying, "As your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here praying to the Lord for this child. And the Lord has granted me the petition I asked of him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord, as long as he lives." Can you hear the weight in her voice? The mixture of joy and sorrow, reverence and human emotion. She's declaring that this child, the very answer to her prayers, is being given back to God in obedience and worship. It's both excruciating and beautiful, and she doesn't hide any of it. You can feel the tension in the scene. On one hand, there's relief and joy because God has answered her prayers. Samuel is in her arms, alive and thriving. On the other hand, there's grief because she's about to part with him, probably knowing that she won't see him daily anymore. That tension makes the moment incredibly human. She's not a stoic hero, she's a mother with all the emotions you'd expect: love, fear, sorrow, and faith intertwined. The way Hannah handles it is remarkable. She doesn't rush, she doesn't panic, she doesn't second guess her decision. She follows through, faithfully and reverently. There's a worshipful attitude throughout the entire process. Every word she speaks to Eli, every offering she brings, every act of presenting Samuel to God is done in a spirit of praise and obedience. She's not just giving Samuel to fulfill a promise, she's worshiping God in the act, acknowledging his sovereignty and goodness even as her heart breaks a little. And it's worth pausing to reflect on the courage this required. Can you imagine the temptation to hesitate to hold him just a little longer, to delay the inevitable parting? But Hannah doesn't. She honors her vow, showing that her faith and trust in God outweigh even her natural human attachment. That balance between human emotion and spiritual devotion is what makes this moment so powerful. She's teaching us in a very real way about surrender, not as a theoretical concept, but as a lived, emotional, and deeply human experience. When the offering is made and Samuel is presented, it's clear that this is a moment of complete consecration. The child is dedicated, the vow is fulfilled, and Hannah's faithfulness is manifest. And yet, the scene is tender, intimate, and profoundly personal. We can almost feel the beating heart of a mother, the quiet tears, the whispered prayers of hope and blessing for her son as he begins this new chapter in service to God. It's a mix of joy and sorrow, relief and reverence, human emotion and divine obedience, all wrapped up in this pivotal moment. And here's the beauty of it. Hannah doesn't just comply out of duty or obligation. She does this in worship. She acknowledges God's faithfulness, His sovereignty, and His worth. Even as she experiences the natural grief of separation, she rejoices in God's plan and trusts that He is faithful to care for Samuel. That's the incredible tension in this scene, the human heart and divine obedience meeting in a moment that is both emotionally raw and spiritually profound. Hannah shows us that worship and obedience are often intertwined, even in moments of deep personal sacrifice. So as we picture Hannah leaving the tabernacle that day, having placed Samuel in God's hands, we see a full spectrum of emotion, the culmination of years of prayer, the faithful fulfillment of a vow, the tender pain of surrender, and the joy of seeing God's promise answered. She walks away not with regret or hesitation, but with a worshipful heart, trusting that God's purposes for her son and for her own life are being fulfilled perfectly. It's a moment that combines human vulnerability with divine faithfulness, and it resonates because it's real, messy, and incredibly inspiring. In the end, this story isn't just about Hannah giving Samuel to the Lord. It's about faith in action. It's about trusting God's timing, honoring vows, and learning to worship even in the midst of personal sacrifice. It's about navigating the tension between our human emotions and the call to spiritual obedience, and doing so with grace, courage, and reverence. Hannah's example teaches us that faith isn't passive, it's active, intentional, and often challenging, but always transformative. Her journey to the tabernacle is a masterclass in surrender, trust, and worship, showing us how deeply intertwined human emotion and divine faithfulness can be. Alright, so now we come to one of my favorite parts of Hannah's story, her prayer of praise in chapter 2. This is where her heart truly bursts with joy and worship, and it's not just the relief of having Samuel, though that's huge. It's about seeing God's hand, His sovereignty, and celebrating who He is, regardless of circumstances. Picture her standing there, maybe still a little in awe herself, realizing that God not only heard her prayer, but also orchestrated a plan far bigger than she could see. And she doesn't just whisper a quiet thanks. She prays with exuberance, with a lifted spirit, proclaiming God's greatness aloud. She starts by rejoicing in the Lord, saying, "My heart rejoices in the Lord, my horn is exalted in the Lord." The horn here is a symbol of strength, like a bull's horn, and she's saying her strength, her victory, her confidence is in God. Isn't that incredible? Even though she's gone through years of sorrow, loss, and longing, her focus shifts from the pain of her past to the power and faithfulness of God. And you can almost hear the excitement in her words, the joy spilling out as she praises God, celebrating the salvation, strength, and honor that comes from Him alone. Then she moves into reflecting on God's justice and sovereignty. She acknowledges that God is the one who raises the poor and brings down the mighty. She celebrates how He gives life and takes it away, makes rich and poor, lifts the humble and humbles the proud. And what's striking here is her perspective. Hannah isn't talking about her own situation anymore, though it is rooted in gratitude for Samuel, but she's looking at God's nature, His character, His ways. She's proclaiming what God does universally, how He governs the world, and how He controls the course of human history. And there's this prophetic edge to it, this recognition that God's hand is at work in ways beyond what we see. And it's inspiring because it reminds us that worship can shift our focus from our small world to the vastness of God's sovereignty. And here comes something really interesting. Hannah speaks prophetically about the coming Messiah. She says, "He will give strength to His king. He will exalt the horn of His anointed." This is huge because it's the first time in the Bible that the coming Messiah is referenced. Samuel has just been born, but her eyes and heart are lifted beyond the immediate joy to the larger story. God is telling the story of salvation and God's ultimate plan for His people. She sees not just the blessing in her life, but the blessing that God will bring through his anointed one. It's awe-inspiring, this mix of personal joy and prophetic insight, all coming together in a single prayer. Throughout this prayer, her tone is one of wonder and amazement. She marvels at God's uniqueness. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. She's not focused on her past grief, the pain of waiting, or the difficulties she faced with Peninnah and the family dynamics. She's looking directly at God's character, celebrating his holiness, his strength, his justice, and his faithfulness. That's something we can really learn from, even in the most difficult circumstances. Worship that centers on who God is, rather than just what he does for us, has power. It changes perspective, it lifts the spirit, and it reminds us that God is always worthy of praise. Her prayer also carries a tone of vindication. She acknowledges that God has seen her suffering and answered her prayer, which indirectly contrasts with those who had mocked or provoked her. But notice how she handles it, not with bitterness or revenge, but with celebration and affirmation of God's justice and sovereignty. She's pointing out gently that God's ways are right, that he balances the scales, and that his timing is perfect. It's a prayer full of life, not resentment. And that's a key lesson. Worship and praise can honor God while acknowledging the truths of our human experiences without turning bitter or harsh. And the more you read it, the more you realize Hannah's prayer is both intensely personal and universally applicable. She's thrilled about Samuel, her answered prayer, but she's also looking at the bigger picture, how God works in the world, how he lifts the humble and guides his anointed, and how his plans span generations. Her words blend gratitude, wonder, and awe with prophetic insight. She's celebrating the immediate blessing and recognizing the long-term significance of God's hand at work, including the coming Messiah who will fulfill God's ultimate plan. It's a perfect model of worship that's grounded in reality, steeped in faith, and lifted by prophecy. Hannah's joy is palpable, and it's contagious when you read it aloud. You can feel the liberation in her voice, the relief of years of sorrow, the triumph of answered prayer, and the awe of witnessing God's sovereignty. It's a reminder that our prayers, and when faithfully offered, lead to not just answers, but transformation. Her prayer of praise invites us to lift our own hearts, to recognize God's hand in our lives, and to celebrate who he is, not just what he gives. Her focus isn't on her struggle anymore, it's on the steadfast God who sees, hears, and acts with perfect timing. And finally, the lesson here is profound. Hannah's praise shows us how worship and prophecy can intersect. She rejoices personally, she declares God's sovereignty, and she proclaims the coming of the Messiah. Her prayer is a living testimony that God is faithful, that he acts in time, and that his plans are far greater than our immediate vision. It's a blend of gratitude, joy, worship, and prophetic insight that lifts her own soul and sets an example for all who read her story. And even now, thousands of years later, we can learn from it to rejoice in God, to trust his timing, to focus on his character, and to celebrate the ultimate hope we have in the Messiah. So, there you have it. Hannah's story is a beautiful reminder of what faith, prayer, and perseverance can look like in real life. She shows us how to trust God, even in the hardest seasons, how to worship before answers come, and how to wait patiently for his timing. If her journey inspires you or gives you hope, stick around for more stories like this. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and take a moment to reflect on how her example might speak into your own life today.